Aisha Williams had seen 72 winters in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and each one had carved its story into the weathered lines of her face. Her hands, strong and calloused from decades of working the land, gripped the steering wheel of her battered pickup truck as she navigated the winding road down to Millbrook County Courthouse. The morning mist clung to the valleys like cotton batting, and the October air carried the sweet scent of decay that always accompanied autumn in the high country. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She hadn't planned on attending the county surplus auction. In fact, she'd only learned about it 3 days prior, when her neighbor, Ruth Henderson, had mentioned it over a cup of chicory coffee on Aisha's front porch. Ruth had been chattering about how the county was selling off all manner of useless things to clear their books before the fiscal year ended. Most folks were interested in the old fire truck or the surplus office equipment, but one item had caught Aisha's attention: Lot 47, the old Copper Creek Bridge. The bridge had been part of her childhood landscape, a sturdy iron truss structure built in 1889 that had once connected the eastern and western parts of the county. It had collapsed during a flash flood 15 years ago, and the county had built a modern concrete bypass 2 miles downstream. The old bridge had sat there ever since, a rusting skeleton half submerged in the creek bed, forgotten by everyone except those old enough to remember when it mattered. Aisha remembered. She remembered running across those iron planks as a girl, the sound of her footsteps echoing off the metal like drum beats. She remembered her father taking her fishing beneath its shadows, where the water ran deep and cold. She remembered her first kiss with Samuel Williams, standing at its center under a full moon in 1969, before he shipped off to Vietnam, before he came back different, before he became her husband, her partner, and eventually 10 years ago. A memory. The courthouse parking lot was nearly full when she arrived. Mostly trucks and SUVs belonging to contractors and resellers, hoping to flip county property for profit. Aisha felt out of place in her faded denim jacket and work boots, her silver hair pulled back in a simple braid. But she'd never been one to worry about appearances. The mountains had taught her that substance outlasted style every single time. Inside, the auction hall buzzed with conversation. Aisha found a seat in the back row, her auction paddle, number 67, resting on her lap. She watched as various lots came and went. Desks, filing cabinets, a 1998 Crown Victoria with 200,000 miles on it. The auctioneer, a portly man named Dale Hutchins, who'd been running county auctions for 30 years, worked through the items with practiced efficiency. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, he reached Lot 47. Next up, we have the old Copper Creek Bridge, or what's left of it, Dale announced, his voice tinny through the microphone. Now, I'll be honest with you folks, the county just wants this liability off their books. The bridge is collapsed, it's on county land, and whoever buys it has 30 days to remove it completely. That means cutting it up, hauling it off, and restoring the creek bed to its natural state. Environmental surveys available for review, and you'll need to post a bond for proper disposal. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't a prize. It was a burden wrapped in bureaucratic red tape. We'll start the bidding at $100, Dale said. Silence. $50. More silence. A few people chuckled. Come on now, there's got to be some scrap value in all that iron, Dale cajoled. How about $25? Nothing. Aisha felt something stir in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. It was more than nostalgia, more than sentimentality. It was a pull, like the bridge was calling to her across the decades. Tell you what, Dale said, clearly wanting to move on. $1. $1 takes the lot, but remember you're responsible for complete removal and disposal. All county regulations apply. Aisha's paddle went up before she could think twice about it. Dale's eyes found her in the back row, and a look of surprise crossed his face. We have $1 from paddle 67. Do I have 2? The room remained silent. A few people turned to look at her, curiosity and amusement on their faces. $1 going once, Dale said. Going twice. He paused, his gavel raised. Sold to paddle 67 for $1. The crack of the gavel echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Aisha sat there, her heart pounding, wondering what on earth she'd just done. She was a 72-year-old woman living on a fixed income, her late husband's modest pension and social security. She had no equipment to dismantle a bridge, no truck large enough to haul iron beams, and certainly no extra money to hire professionals. The removal would cost thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars she didn't have, but as she made her way to the payment window, fishing a dollar bill from her wallet, she felt a strange sense of rightness about the decision. The bridge had been part of her story, and now, in what might be the final chapter of her life, it had become part of her story again. The clerk, a young woman with bright pink fingernails, processed the paperwork with barely concealed amusement. "You know you have to remove it within 30 days, right?" she asked. "I know," Aisha replied. "And restore the creek bed?" "I know." The clerk shrugged and handed her the deed. "It's all yours, then." "Congratulations, I guess." Aisha folded the document carefully and placed it in her jacket pocket. As she walked out into the cool October afternoon, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just set something in motion, something that would change everything. She had no idea how right she was. The morning after the auction, Aisha woke before dawn, as she had for most of her adult life. The roosters in her chicken coop were just beginning their chorus when she pulled on her work clothes and made a pot of strong coffee. Her small cabin, built by Samuel's grandfather in 1923, sat on 40 acres of mountain land at the end of a gravel road that became impassable in winter. She'd raised 2 children here, buried a husband here, and intended to die here when her time came. But first, she had a bridge to deal with. After a breakfast of eggs from her hens and toast from bread she'd baked 3 days prior, Aisha loaded her truck with supplies: rope, her late husband's surveying equipment, a camera, work gloves, and a thermos of coffee. She also grabbed Samuel's old toolbox, though she wasn't sure why. The bridge was far beyond anything simple tools could fix. The drive to Copper Creek took 40 minutes, mostly on winding mountain roads that tourists found terrifying and locals navigated with casual confidence. Aisha had driven these roads so many times she could do it in her sleep. Though she'd never been foolish enough to try, the new bridge hummed with morning traffic as she passed beneath it, following an overgrown access road that led to the old bridge site. The county had put up a chain-link fence years ago, but time and neglect had made it more suggestion than barrier. Aisha parked her truck and stood for a moment, studying the ruins. The Copper Creek Bridge had been a beautiful piece of engineering in its day. A 180-foot iron truss bridge with Gothic-style arches and decorative riveted panels. Now it sagged into the creek like a dying beast, its iron beams twisted and rust-covered, its wooden deck long since rotted away or swept downstream. The eastern approach had collapsed completely during the flood, while the western end still clung stubbornly to the original stone abutment. Aisha ducked through a gap in the fence and picked her way down the rocky slope to the creek bed. The water was low this time of year, barely a trickle compared to the torrent that flowed during spring melt. She could see where the flood had torn through, scouring the banks and repositioning massive boulders like a giant playing marbles. Up close, the bridge was even more daunting. Iron beams as thick as tree trunks lay crisscrossed in the creek bed, some partially buried in silt and gravel. The main truss structure still stood, though at a precarious angle, groaning softly in the morning breeze like it was in pain. "What were you thinking, Aisha?" she muttered to herself, a habit she'd developed since Samuel's death. Talking to yourself wasn't crazy when you lived alone. It was companionship. She spent the next hour documenting everything with her camera, taking measurements and making notes in the small leather journal she always carried. The engineer in her, she'd worked as a surveyor's assistant in her younger days, catalogued the structural elements, estimated weights, and calculated the logistics of dismantling such a massive structure. The numbers weren't encouraging. Even if she could find someone to do the work at cost, She was looking at a minimum of $15,000, probably closer to 25. She had maybe 3,000 in savings, money she'd been setting aside for a new roof come spring. As she stood there, trying to figure out how she'd gotten herself into this mess, she heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind her. "Thought I might find you here." Aisha turned to see Roy Blackwood, her closest neighbor and one of Samuel's oldest friends. Roy was 75, built like a barrel, with a white beard that would make Santa jealous and hands that had built half the houses in the county. "Morning, Roy," Aisha said. "Come to see the bridge I bought for $1. Roy chuckled, making his way carefully down the slope. "Ruth told me about your winning bid. Got to say, I'm starting to think you're right." They stood side by side, staring at the wreckage. Roy pulled out a tin of chewing tobacco, offered it to Aisha, who declined, and tucked a wad into his cheek. "What were you planning to do with it?" he asked. "I don't know," Aisha admitted. "I just couldn't stand the thought of it being here forgotten. Sam and I had our first kiss on this bridge." "I remember," Roy said quietly. "I was there that night. You two thought you were being so sneaky." Aisha smiled at the memory. "We were terrible at sneaking. So what now? You going to try to restore it?" "Can't," Aisha said, pulling out the deed from her pocket. "County wants it removed completely. 30 days to tear it down and restore the creek bed." Roy whistled low. "That's going to cost you more than I have." They stood in silence for a while. The only sound the gentle burble of the creek and the distant rush of traffic on the new bridge. "I might know some folks who'd help," Roy finally said. "There's probably $1,000 worth of scrap iron here, maybe more. If we can get a crew together, cut it up proper, haul it to the recycling yard, the scrap money might offset some of the cost." "That's still going to leave me short," Aisha said. "Maybe," Roy agreed. "But you're not alone, Aisha. Never have been. Let me make some calls." As Roy headed back to his truck, Aisha turned her attention back to the bridge. She decided to explore the western abutment, the only part of the structure still relatively intact. The stone foundation was massive, built from local granite blocks that had been quarried from a site 3 miles upstream. Each block weighed several hundred pounds and had been positioned with such precision that, even after more than a century, they remained perfectly fitted. She climbed onto the abutment, careful of the loose stones and metal debris. The old roadbed was still visible here, though covered in 15 years of leaves and dirt. As she walked along it, something caught her eye, a gap between 2 foundation stones that looked almost deliberate, like a seam or access point. Curious, Aisha knelt down and peered into the gap. It was dark inside, but she could see that it opened into a larger space beneath the abutment. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. Angling it into the opening, what she saw made her breath catch. There, in the beam of her flashlight, she could make out what looked like wooden crates stacked in a small chamber beneath the bridge foundation. The crates were old, covered in dust and cobwebs, but they appeared intact. Aisha's heart began to race. Her first thought was that someone had used the space for storage decades ago and forgotten about it. Her second thought was more troubling. This could be a dumping ground for something dangerous or illegal. She needed to get inside and see what was there. But the gap was too small for her to fit through, and she didn't want to disturb the foundation stones without knowing what she was dealing with. Aisha sat back on her heels, her mind racing. She'd bought this bridge on impulse, driven by nostalgia and sentiment. Now, less than 24 hours later, she'd discovered something hidden in its foundations, something that had been concealed for who knows how long. The rational part of her brain said to call the county, report the find, and let professionals handle it. But another part, the part that had survived 72 years in these mountains, raised 2 kids on a surveyor's salary, and learned to trust her instincts, that part said to wait. She took several photos of the gap and the barely visible crates, then carefully replaced the loose stones to hide the opening. Whatever was down there had waited this long. It could wait a little longer while she figured out her next move. As she drove home that afternoon, Aisha couldn't stop thinking about those crates. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and she found herself repeatedly glancing at the photos on her phone at every stop sign. What had she stumbled onto? And more importantly, what was she going to do about it? Aisha didn't sleep well that night. She tossed and turned in the bed she'd shared with Samuel for 43 years, her mind churning through possibilities. The crates could contain anything: old county records, bootleggers' contraband from Prohibition, construction materials left by the bridge builders, or something far more sinister. By 4 a.m., she gave up on sleep and made coffee. Sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop, a gift from her daughter 2 Christmases ago that she'd only recently learned to use with any competence, Aisha began researching. The history of the Copper Creek Bridge, the internet she'd discovered, was a treasure trove of information if you knew where to look. The County Historical Society had digitized old newspapers, and she found several articles about the bridge's construction in 1889. It had been a major undertaking, funded by a combination of county bonds and private investment. The lead engineer had been a man named Josiah Crawford, who designed bridges throughout the South. But it was an article from 1934 that made Aisha sit up straighter in her chair. Local bridge closed for emergency repairs. Read the headline in the Millbrook County Gazette, dated March 15, 1934. The article was brief, noting that the Copper Creek Bridge had been closed to traffic for approximately 2 weeks, while county workers reinforced the Western Foundation following concerns about structural integrity. The bridge had reopened on March 28, 1934. Aisha leaned back in her chair, thinking. 1934 was right in the middle of the Great Depression. It was also the era of bank failures, when people hoarded cash and valuables because they didn't trust financial institutions. Could someone have used the bridge repair as an opportunity to hide something? She made a note in her journal and continued searching. Another interesting tidbit emerged from a 1935 newspaper article about the mysterious disappearance of Marcus Thorne, president of the Millbrook County Bank. Thorne had vanished in March 1935, and there were allegations, never proven, that he'd embezzled funds from the bank. The bank had failed shortly after his disappearance, wiping out the savings of hundreds of local families. The timing was suspicious. The bridge had been closed for repairs in March 1934. Thorne had disappeared in March 1935. Was there a connection? Aisha spent the rest of the morning digging deeper. She found records showing that Josiah Crawford, the bridge's original engineer, had died in 1932, 2 years before the repairs. The county engineer in 1934 had been a man named Henry Vickers, who'd held the position for only 18 months before being replaced. She couldn't find much information about Vickers, which was odd. By noon, Aisha had a theory forming, but it was based more on speculation than evidence. She needed to see what was actually in those crates, but she couldn't do it alone. The question was, who could she trust? Her first instinct was to call Roy, but she hesitated. Roy was honest to a fault, and if there was something illegal or valuable hidden beneath the bridge, he'd insist on calling the authorities immediately. Aisha wasn't opposed to involving the law eventually, but she wanted to know what she was dealing with first. The county, legally speaking, owned the bridge until she removed it. If she reported finding hidden crates, they might claim ownership of the contents. And if those contents were valuable enough to solve her bridge removal problem, she wanted to make sure she had a claim to them. She needed advice, preferably from someone who understood both the law and the peculiarities of property rights. That afternoon, Aisha drove into town to visit Martin Cruz, an attorney who'd handled Samuel's estate and her will. Martin was in his 60s, semi-retired, and spent more time fishing than practicing law these days. But he still kept an office above the hardware store on Main Street. Aisha Williams, Martin said, looking up from his desk with genuine pleasure as she entered. To what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me you're finally going to let me set up that trust we talked about. Not today, Martin, Aisha said, settling into the worn leather chair across from his desk. I need some hypothetical legal advice. Martin's eyebrows rose. Hypothetical, is it? Those are always the most interesting kind. Aisha chose her words carefully. Let's say someone bought a piece of property from the county, and after purchasing it, they discovered something hidden on or in that property. Something that had been there for decades. Who owns what was found? Martin leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. That depends on several factors. Was the property sold as is, or were there specific conditions in the sale? As is. Actually, the county just wanted it gone and was happy to sell it for $1. $1? Martin's eyes narrowed. Aisha, did you buy something at the county auction? Hypothetically, Aisha said, but she could see from Martin's expression that he wasn't fooled. Fine, we'll play hypothetical, Martin said. Generally speaking, when you purchase property, you purchase everything on it or in it, unless specifically excluded in the contract. That includes anything discovered after the sale, as long as the discovery is made on the property you now own. However, he held up a finger, there are exceptions. Archaeological artifacts, for instance, or items of significant historical value might fall under state or federal jurisdiction. Also, if the hidden items are obviously not the property of the seller, things get complicated. What if the items were hidden intentionally? Like someone put them there decades ago and they've been forgotten. That gets into treasure trove law, which is murky at best, Martin said. In most states, if you find treasure on your own property, it's yours. But treasure has a specific legal definition. It usually means gold, silver, or currency that was hidden with the intent to recover it later. If the original owner can be identified and they or their heirs make a claim, you might have to split it or return it entirely. Aisha absorbed this information. And if I hypothetically found something, should I report it to the county immediately? Martin studied her for a long moment. Aisha, I've known you for 15 years. You're one of the most honest people I've ever met. So I'm going to give you advice as a friend, not just as a lawyer. If you found something significant, document everything thoroughly before you involve anyone else. Take photos, make notes, establish a clear timeline. Once you know what you're dealing with, then decide your next steps. The law tends to favor the person who has the best documentation, and if it turns out to be valuable, then you'll definitely need a lawyer, and I'll be happy to help. But Aisha, he leaned forward, his expression serious, be careful. Money has a way of bringing out the worst in people, and small towns have long memories. Whatever you've found, whatever you do next, think it through carefully. Aisha left Martin's office with her head spinning, but her course of action clearer. She would open the chamber beneath the bridge, document whatever she found, and then make an informed decision about what to do next. But she couldn't do it alone, and after much consideration, she knew who she had to call. That evening, she dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years. Mom. Her son's voice came through the phone, surprised. Aisha rarely called Jake unless it was important. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, honey, Aisha said. But I need your help with something. How quickly can you get to the mountain? Jake Williams arrived 2 days later, pulling up to his mother's cabin in a silver sedan that looked absurdly out of place on the rutted mountain road. At 45, he'd inherited his father's height and his mother's stubbornness, though he'd channeled both into a successful career as a civil engineer in Charlotte. He'd been trying to convince Aisha to move to the city for years, to no avail. Mom, he said, embracing her on the porch, you sounded mysterious on the phone. What's going on? Over coffee and apple pie, Aisha explained everything, the auction, the bridge, the discovery, and her research. Jake listened without interrupting, his engineer's mind processing the information. So, you bought a condemned bridge for $1, found secret crates hidden in the foundation, and now you want to break into them before telling anyone. Jake summarized, his tone caught between amusement and concern. I'm not breaking into anything, Aisha corrected. I own the bridge. I'm simply inspecting my property. That's a fine semantic distinction. Mom, telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I learned from the best, Aisha said, referring to her late husband. who'd been known for finding loopholes in county regulations when it suited him. Jake sighed. "You know I can't say no to you. When do we do this?" "Tomorrow morning, early. Before the world wakes up." They arrived at the bridge site at dawn, the valley still shrouded in mist. Jake had brought professional equipment from his work. High-powered LED lights, pry bars, a portable air quality monitor, and a good camera. They parked out of sight of the road and made their way down to the western abutment. "Show me," Jake said. Aisha led him to the gap in the stones and shone her light inside. Jake took several photos, then pulled out what looked like a small periscope with a camera attached. "Endoscope," he explained. "We use them to inspect inside concrete structures." He fed the device through the gap, watching the screen as he maneuvered it around the hidden chamber. "Okay, I see the crates. They're wooden old and there are at least a dozen of them. Can we get in there?" Jake studied the foundation. "These stones were meant to be accessed. See here, this isn't damage. It's a designed opening. Someone could remove these 3 stones and create an entrance large enough for a person. Working carefully, they shifted the stones. Each one weighed close to 200 pounds, but Jake had brought a portable hoist and pulley system. Within an hour, they'd created an opening large enough to enter. Jake went first, descending into the chamber with a flashlight. Aisha heard him gasp. "Mom, you need to see this." Aisha lowered herself into the chamber, her joints protesting but managing. The space was about 8 feet square and 6 feet high, carved into the natural rock beneath the bridge foundation. It was dry, surprisingly well preserved, and filled with wooden crates. The crates were stamped with dates from 1934, and the words Millbrook County Bank in faded black letters. Jake approached the nearest crate carefully, testing its stability. The wood was old, but intact, held together with nails that had rusted but still held. He looked at his mother. "Do we open it?" Aisha pulled out her phone and began photographing everything. The chamber, the crates, the stamps, every detail. "Document first," she said, echoing Martin's advice. "Then we look." After 20 minutes of thorough documentation, Jake used a pry bar to carefully open the first crate. The wood creaked and splintered but gave way. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them remarkably well, were bundles of paper. Jake lifted one bundle carefully and unwrapped it. They were looking at stacks of currency, old bills, 20s and 50s and hundreds from the 1920s and early 1930s. "Oh my God," Jake whispered. They opened a second crate. More money, a third. "The same." "Mom," Jake said, his voice shaking slightly, "how many crates are there?" Aisha counted. 14. They worked methodically, opening each crate and documenting the contents. Every single one contained currency, some also holding gold coins and bearer bonds from defunct companies. By the time they'd finished, they were both sitting in stunned silence. "We need to count it," Aisha finally said. "We need to call the police." Jake counted. After we count it, they spent the next 6 hours in that hidden chamber, carefully inventorying everything they found. Jake created a detailed spreadsheet on his laptop, noting denominations, quantities, and condition. The gold coins alone numbered over 300. The bearer bonds, while possibly worthless, represented shares in companies from the Depression era, but it was the currency that took their breath away. "According to my calculations," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's approximately $3.2 million here. In 1934, money," Aisha added, "right, but that's not all cash. Some of these bills are collectible now. There are silver certificates, gold certificates, and Federal Reserve notes from before the series was changed. Mom, some of these individual bills could be worth thousands to collectors." Aisha sat on an upturned crate, trying to process what they'd found. $3 million. Hidden for 90 years. On her property. "Marcus Thorne," she said quietly. "The banker who disappeared? He must have embezzled the money when the bank was failing, hidden it here during the bridge repairs in 1934, and planned to come back for it. But something happened. Maybe he died, maybe he was killed, maybe he just couldn't get back to it. All these years, it's been sitting here waiting. What do we do?" Jake asked. Aisha thought about the families who'd lost their savings when the bank failed. She thought about the law, about what was right, and about what was legal. She thought about her property taxes, her roof that needed replacing, and the bridge she'd committed to removing. "We do the right thing," she said, "but we do it smart. Help me seal these crates back up." "Mum, trust me, Jake, I have a plan." They carefully resealed the crates, leaving everything as they'd found it, except for their detailed documentation. They replaced the stones in the foundation opening, disguising the entrance once again. As they drove away from the bridge, Aisha made a phone call. "Martin, it's Aisha Williams. Remember that hypothetical situation we discussed? It's not so hypothetical anymore, and I need you to work up a real legal strategy. I'm coming to your office tomorrow with my son, and we need to discuss treasure trove law, property rights, and how to handle a significant discovery without losing everything to bureaucracy or thieves." After she hung up, Jake glanced at his mother. "You really think we can keep this?" "I think we have a legitimate legal claim," Aisha said. "And I think we're going to need every penny to handle what comes next. Because once word gets out, and it will, this quiet little mountain is going to become the center of a storm." She was right about that. Martin Cruz's office had never seen an emergency Sunday meeting before, but he made an exception for Aisha Williams. The attorney sat behind his desk, reading through Jake's documentation and examining the photographs with increasing astonishment. "This is extraordinary," Martin said for the third time. "And you're certain all of this was contained within the bridge foundation, on property you now own?" "Absolutely certain," Aisha confirmed. We have photos, video, and a complete inventory." Martin leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his lips. "Here's our situation from a legal standpoint. The property, the bridge, and the land it sits on was sold to you by the county. They sold it as is for $1, with the understanding that you would remove it at your own expense. At the moment of sale, everything on or within that property became yours, including anything disco." Veered afterward. "So it's hers?" Jake asked. "It's not that simple," Martin said. "There are several parties who might claim interest in this money. First, there's the county. They might argue they didn't know about the hidden chamber and therefore didn't intend to sell its contents. Second, there's the FDIC or whatever entity absorbed the old Millbrook County Bank's assets when it failed. Third, there might be heirs of Marcus Thorne, if he can be proven to have hidden the money. Fourth, there could be descendants of the original depositors whose money was allegedly embezzled. That's a lot of claims," Aisha observed. "Yes. But here's where we have leverage," Martin continued. "Property law generally favors the current property owner when it comes to found items, especially items that have been abandoned for decades. The legal concept is treasure trove, money or valuables hidden by an unknown party long ago. In most jurisdictions, treasure trove belongs to the finder if found on their own property." "Most jurisdictions?" Jake asked. "North Carolina's law on this is murky because we don't have many cases establishing clear precedent," Martin admitted. "But I've been doing research since Aisha's first visit, and I think we can build a strong case. The key is how we proceed from here. What do you suggest?" Aisha asked. Martin pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "First, we secure the site. You need professional security to make sure no one else finds this before we've established legal ownership. Second, we need to officially document the find with a legal affidavit, establishing the date and circumstances of discovery. Third, and this is crucial, we need to negotiate before we announce." "Negotiate with whom?" Jake asked. "The county, primarily. Look, they sold you the bridge for $1 because it was a liability. They wanted it gone. Now you could litigate this for years, spend hundreds of thousands in legal fees, and risk losing everything. Or you could approach the county with a proposal that benefits everyone." "I'm listening," Aisha said. "You offer them a settlement. Say 20% of the fine's value in exchange for clear title to the remaining 80%. You use part of your share to professionally remove the bridge, satisfying your contractual obligation. The county gets unexpected revenue, you get legal clarity, and everyone avoids years of litigation. That's giving away over $500,000, Jake pointed out, versus potentially losing everything in court, Martin countered. Plus, the publicity from a drawn-out legal battle would make Aisha's life miserable. Every treasure hunter and con artist in the country would descend on these mountains. Aisha considered this. Martin was right. She valued her privacy and the quiet life she'd built. A protracted legal fight would destroy both. What about the people who lost money when the bank failed? She asked. Don't they have a claim? Martin's expression softened. Morally, perhaps. Legally, after 90 years, their claims would be nearly impossible to prove and pursue. The statute of limitations has long since passed. However, he looked at Aisha knowingly, nothing would stop you from voluntarily setting aside a portion of your recovery for a community fund or memorial to those who suffered. I want to do that, Aisha said immediately. That's your decision to make. But let's secure your legal position first, Martin advised. Jake, you mentioned some of these bills might have collector value beyond face value. We need to get this appraised by professional currency experts before we determine the total value. I know people, Jake said. I can make some calls discreetly. Do it, Martin said. But here's the order of operations. First, secure the site today. Second, get professional appraisals this week. Third, I'll draft a settlement proposal for the county. Fourth, once we have an agreement in principle, we make a public announcement in a controlled manner. Fifth, we work with law enforcement to safely remove and secure the currency. What about the removal of the bridge itself? Aisha asked. I still have a deadline. Once the county sees the revenue they'll gain, I suspect they'll be flexible on timelines, Martin said with a slight smile. In fact, they might even help with removal costs, considering the windfall coming their way. This feels too good to be true, Jake said skeptically. It's not without risks, Martin acknowledged. If word leaks before we have legal agreements in place, this becomes much more complicated. And there's always the possibility of other claimants emerging. But I've been practicing law in this county for 35 years, and I know how these things work. The county commissioners are pragmatic people. They'll see that a quick, fair settlement beats years of expensive litigation. Aisha nodded slowly. All right, let's do this your way, Martin. But I want it done right. No cutting corners, no ethical gray areas. This money sat hidden for 90 years because someone made dishonest choices. I won't build my future on the same foundation. Wouldn't expect anything less from you, Martin said warmly. Now, about security, I'll call Roy Blackwood, Aisha interrupted. He's trustworthy, and he has connections with the local veterans group. They can set up a watch rotation until this is settled. Good, Martin said. The fewer people who know the details, the better. Tell Roy you've found something of value that needs protecting. But don't specify what or how much until after we've secured the legal framework. They spent another hour going over details, with Martin making notes and outlining their strategy. As they prepared to leave, the attorney looked at Aisha with genuine concern. Are you ready for how this is going to change your life? He asked. Aisha thought about her quiet cabin, her chickens, her simple routines. She thought about Samuel and how he'd always protected her from the world's complications. She thought about being 72 years old and suddenly thrust into a situation that would attract attention, scrutiny, and probably resentment from some quarters. No, she said honestly, but I'm going to do it anyway. This money can do good, Martin, real good, not just for me, but for this community. People are struggling. Young families can't afford to stay in these mountains. Our schools are underfunded. Maybe this is why that bridge called to me. Maybe there's a purpose to all of this. Martin smiled. Just like Samuel, you always see the bigger picture. All right, let's make this happen. I'll have preliminary documents ready by Tuesday. As Aisha and Jake drove back to the cabin, the sun was setting over the Blue Ridge, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Jake broke the silence. Dad would have loved this, he said quietly. Would he? Aisha asked. Your father valued privacy above almost everything. He also valued justice, Jake replied, and taking care of people. He would have wanted you to do exactly what you're planning, use this money to help others. I hope you're right, Aisha said, because there's no turning back now. That night, after Jake had gone to bed in his old room, Aisha sat on her porch and looked up at the stars. Somewhere down in the valley the old bridge waited. Holding secrets that were about to be revealed, she thought about Marcus Thorne, the banker who'd stolen from desperate people during the worst economic crisis in American history. She thought about the families who'd lost everything when the bank failed. She thought about justice delayed and the strange paths fate sometimes took. "Well, Samuel," she said to the stars, "looks like our golden years are going to be more interesting than we planned." The mountains offered no answer. But the night breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves and the distant sound of Copper Creek, flowing as it had for millennia. Indifferent to the human dramas that played out along its banks, word travels fast in small mountain communities, even when you're trying to keep secrets. By Monday afternoon, everyone in a 10-mile radius knew that something was happening at the old Copper Creek Bridge. Roy Blackwood had assembled a security rotation of 8 veterans, all sworn to discretion. But their presence alone attracted attention. Aisha spent Monday morning with Jake and a carefully vetted currency appraiser named Dr. Helena Moss, a professor of numismatics from Duke University. Dr. Moss had signed an ironclad non-disclosure agreement before being shown a small sample of the find. Her reaction upon examining the bills had been worth the 2-hour drive from Durham. "Mrs. Williams," Dr. Moss said, her hands trembling slightly as she examined a 1929 $500 Federal Reserve note, "do you understand what you have here?"
"Old money,"
Aisha ventured. This single bill in this condition could fetch $3,000 at auction. "And you're telling me there are hundreds like it?" Jake pulled up his inventory spreadsheet. "We counted 127 $500 bills, 43 $1,000 bills, and over 200 gold certificates in various denominations." Dr. Moss sat down heavily. The gold certificates alone. They were recalled in 1933 when FDR took the country off the gold standard. Citizens were required to turn them in. The fact that these were saved makes them incredibly rare. Depending on condition and specific series, some of these could be worth 10 to 20 times their face value. "So the total value," Aisha prompted. "I'd need to examine every piece to give you an accurate appraisal. But based on what you're showing me, you're not looking at $3 million. You're looking at something significantly higher. Possibly 5 to 7 million, maybe more. I'd need to bring in additional experts for the gold coins and bearer bonds." Jake and Aisha exchanged looks. "This changed everything. How long would a complete appraisal take?" Aisha asked. "With proper documentation and authentication, at least 2 weeks, possibly a month. And Mrs. Williams, you need to know, once this becomes public knowledge, you'll need serious security. There are people who would kill for a find like this." That sobering thought hung in the air as they drove Dr. Moss back to her car. She would return on Wednesday with a team and proper equipment. In the meantime, Roy's veterans kept watch, and Martin Cruz worked on the legal framework. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected complication. Aisha was feeding her chickens when a black SUV pulled up to her cabin. 2 people emerged, a man in his 60s wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in the mountains, and a younger woman with a briefcase. "Mrs. Williams? I'm Robert Thorne, and this is my attorney, Patricia Chen. Might we have a word?" Aisha's heart sank. Thorne, as in Marcus Thorne, the banker who'd hidden the money. "I suppose you'd better come in," she said. Over coffee in her small kitchen, Robert Thorne laid out his case. He was Marcus Thorne's grandson, a real estate developer from Atlanta who'd spent years researching his grandfather's disappearance. "My family has been destroyed by shame for 90 years, Robert said. "My grandfather was branded a thief and an embezzler. My father grew up being spat upon in the street. I'm here to clear the family name and recover what belongs to us." "With respect, Mr. Thorne," Aisha said carefully, "your grandfather stole that money from desperate people during the Depression." "That was never proven," Patricia Chen interjected. "Marcus Thorne was never charged with a crime, never convicted. The allegations were based on circumstantial evidence and mob mentality." He disappeared right when the bank failed, Aisha pointed out. He disappeared because he was afraid for his life, Robert countered. The bank failed because of the depression, not because of my grandfather. Yes, there was money missing, but that doesn't prove he took it. For all we know, he hid assets to protect them from the bank's creditors, planning to use them to pay back depositors later. Do you have evidence of that? Aisha asked. Robert pulled out a worn leather journal. This was my grandfather's diary, found among my father's effects after he died. The entries stop in March 1935, right before his disappearance. In it, he talks about securing the future and making things right. He mentions the bridge specifically. Aisha examined the journal. The handwriting was elegant but rushed in the later entries, suggesting stress or urgency. One passage stood out. The money is safe, hidden where no one will think to look. When the storm passes, I will retrieve it and make whole those who trusted me. The bridge will be my redemption or my tomb. This doesn't prove his innocence, Aisha said. But it creates reasonable doubt about his guilt, Patricia Chen argued. And more importantly, it establishes that Marcus Thorne is the person who hid the money, which means his heirs have a legal claim to it. The money was stolen from bank depositors, Aisha said firmly. Allegedly, Robert stressed, and even if it was, the legal principle of treasure trove states that hidden valuables belong to the property owner where they're found, unless the original owner can be identified and makes a claim. We're making that claim. Aisha felt the situation spiraling beyond her control. I need to speak with my attorney. Of course, Patricia Chen said smoothly, sliding a business card across the table. But Mrs. Williams, I want to be clear. We're not looking for a fight. We'd prefer to settle this amicably. Mr. Thorne is willing to acknowledge your role as finder and your property rights. We'd like to propose a 50-50 split of the proceeds. After they left, Aisha immediately called Martin Cruz, who listened grimly to the development. I was afraid of this, Martin said. The Thorne claim is problematic. They have some legal standing, but it's not ironclad. The problem is, fighting them in court could take years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Could they actually win? Aisha asked. Maybe. Treasure trove law is complicated, and there's the question of whether stolen money can even qualify as treasure trove. Some courts have held that it can't, that stolen property should be returned to the rightful owners or their heirs, if identifiable. The bank depositors, right. But after 90 years, tracking down all those depositors' heirs would be nearly impossible. The court might decide to split it between you and the Thornes, or award it all to one party with some compensation to the other. It's genuinely unpredictable. What do you recommend? I think we need to get ahead of this, Martin said. I'm going to call an emergency meeting with the county commissioners for tomorrow. We need to lock down our settlement with them before the Thornes muddy the waters further. Once we have the county on our side, we'll be in a better position to negotiate with the Thornes from a position of strength. The meeting took place Wednesday morning in the county courthouse, in a conference room that smelled of old wood and lemon polish. Present were 3 county commissioners, the county attorney, Martin Cruz, Aisha, Jake, and a court reporter. Martin laid out the situation clearly and professionally. He presented the documentation of the find, the preliminary appraisals suggesting a value of $5 to $7 million, and a proposal. Aisha would pay the county 25% of the appraised value in exchange for clear title, and the county's support in any legal challenges. Commissioner James Rutledge, a farmer who'd served on the board for 20 years, spoke first. Let me make sure I understand this. You bought a bridge from us for $1, found millions hidden inside, and now you're offering us more than $1 million? Yes, sir, Aisha said. And what's to stop us from just claiming the whole thing? Asked Commissioner Sandra Liu. The law, Martin said calmly. And common sense. You could try to claim it, but property law is clear. You sold the bridge and everything on or in it to Mrs. Williams. You'd be fighting an uphill battle in court, spending taxpayer money on expensive litigation with no guarantee of success. Meanwhile, the property would remain in legal limbo, unsecured and vulnerable to theft. Our proposal gives you substantial revenue immediately, with no risk and no cost. The third commissioner, Margaret Holloway, who taught Aisha's children in elementary school, smiled. I think what Mrs. Williams is offering is more than fair, but I have concerns about these Thorne people who showed up. If they have a claim, does that affect our settlement? That's why we need this agreement formalized immediately, Martin said. With the county as a partner in Mrs. Williams' claim, you have standing to help defend her title. The Thornes would have to fight both of you. The commissioners excused themselves to deliberate. They were gone for less than 20 minutes. We have a deal, Rutledge announced when they returned. 25% to the county, 75% to Mrs. Williams, with the understanding that the county will support her legal ownership in any challenges. We'll draft a formal agreement by end of week. As they left the courthouse, Aisha felt simultaneous relief and apprehension. They'd secured the county's support, but the Thorne problem remained. That afternoon, she called Robert Thorne. Mr. Thorne, I've reviewed your grandfather's journal and consulted with my attorney. I'm willing to discuss a settlement, but not a 50-50 split. I'm thinking 70-30, with the 30% going to you and a requirement that you publicly acknowledge your grandfather's role in the bank failure and issue a formal apology to the descendants of those who lost their savings. There was a long silence on the other end. That's not what we discussed, Robert finally said. I know, but it's my offer. You can take it, or we can litigate for the next 5 years, spend millions in legal fees, and risk getting nothing. Your grandfather hid stolen money. Whether he meant to make it right or not, he never did. This is your chance to actually make it right. Another pause. I need to discuss this with my attorney. Take your time, Aisha said, but not too much time. I'm holding a press conference on Monday to announce the find. You'll want to have made your decision before then. After she hung up, Jake looked at his mother with newfound respect. When did you become such a hardball negotiator? About the same time I realized that being polite and accommodating my whole life got me a pension that barely covers expenses and a roof with holes, Aisha said. I'm 72 years old, Jake. I don't have time to waste on other people's pride. The phone rang again. It was Patricia Chen. Mrs. Williams, my client is willing to accept your terms with one modification. He wants 15%, not 30%, but he'd like the settlement to include funding for a historical marker at the bridge site, telling the full story of what happened. He believes sunlight is the best disinfectant, and he wants the truth told, whatever it is. Aisha thought about this. A historical marker would serve the community's memory and educate future generations about the Depression and its impact on mountain communities. 15% in the marker, but I choose the historian who writes the text, and it must acknowledge both the theft and the suffering of the depositors. Agreed. We'll have the paperwork ready by Friday. As the sun set over the mountains that evening, Aisha sat on her porch with a glass of whiskey, something she rarely indulged in, and marveled at how much her life had changed in 1 week. She'd bought a bridge for $1, found $5 million, negotiated settlements with the county and the descendants of the man who'd stolen the money, and she still had to figure out what to do with her share. But that, she decided, was a problem for tomorrow. News of the discovery broke on Monday morning, and by afternoon, Aisha's quiet mountain road looked like a media circus. News vans from Charlotte, Raleigh, and even Atlanta lined the gravel drive. Reporters stationed themselves at her property line, hoping for a statement. Martin Cruz had prepared her for this. The press conference was held at the county courthouse, with security provided by the sheriff's department. Aisha stood at a podium, feeling absurdly out of place in the dress her daughter had sent overnight delivery. Facing a sea of cameras and microphones, she read from a prepared statement, explaining the discovery, the legal settlements, and her intentions for the money. The reporters erupted with questions, but Martin stepped in. "Mrs. Williams will take 3 questions only," he announced. A reporter from the Charlotte Observer was recognized first. "Mrs. Williams, you're giving away more than half the money you found." "Why?" Aisha thought about the question. "Because it's not just about me," she said simply. "This money was stolen from people who were already suffering. I can't give it back to them, they're long gone. But I can honor their memory by using it to help their community. What specifically will you do with your share?" asked a reporter from the local paper. "I'm establishing the Copper Creek Community Fund," Aisha said, announcing a decision she'd made the night before. "It will provide college scholarships for local students, grants for small businesses, and support for families in crisis. The principal will be preserved, and the interest will fund good works in perpetuity." The third question came from a young woman representing a podcast about historical mysteries. "Do you feel guilty benefiting from stolen money?" Aisha met her eyes steadily. "I feel responsible for it. There's a difference. I didn't steal it, but I found it, and now I have an obligation to do something meaningful with it. That's not guilt, that's stewardship." After the press conference, as Martin ushered her to a waiting car, an elderly woman pushed through the crowd and grabbed Aisha's arm. Security moved to intervene, but Aisha held up a hand. "My grandmother lost everything when that bank failed," the woman said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Everything. My grandfather had to leave these mountains to find work. My mother grew up in a factory town in South Carolina, never knowing her home. Thank you for remembering them. Thank you for making it mean something." Aisha hugged her, and the cameras captured the moment. That photo, 2 elderly mountain women embracing while tears ran down their faces, would become the defining image of the story. The following weeks were overwhelming. The currency appraisal took 3 weeks and confirmed Dr. Moss's estimate. The total value was approximately $6.2 million after accounting for the numismatic value of rare bills and the gold coins. After settlements with the county, 25%, the Thorns 15%, legal fees 10% and taxes, Aisha's share came to approximately $2.1 million. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having, and it terrified her almost as much as it excited her. Her children came home to help her navigate the sudden change. Jake took a leave from his job to handle the financial logistics. Her daughter Monica, a social worker in Asheville, helped establish the community fund's structure and mission. "Mom, you need to think about yourself too," Monica insisted one evening. "This is your chance to live comfortably, to travel, to do all the things you and Dad never could afford." "I am thinking about myself," Aisha said. "This is what will make me happy, knowing that something good came from something bad." But Monica was right about one thing. Aisha did need to make some changes for herself. Her cabin needed repairs that she'd been putting off for years. Her truck was on its last legs, and her health issues, which she'd been managing with cheap generic medications, deserved better care. She set aside $500,000 for herself, home repairs, a reliable vehicle, healthcare, and a cushion for emergencies. The rest went into the Copper Creek Community Fund. The fund's first board meeting was held 6 weeks after the discovery. Aisha had assembled a diverse group: Roy Blackwood, her daughter Monica, a local teacher named Thomas Chen, the pastor of the Methodist Church, and young entrepreneur named Destiny Freeman, who'd started a successful organic farm in the valley. "Before we begin," Aisha said, "I want to establish our guiding principle. This money doesn't belong to me. It belongs to this community, held in trust for future generations. Our job is to use it wisely, to help people without creating dependency, and to honor the memory of those who suffered during the Depression." They established priorities: education, economic development, emergency assistance, and historic preservation. The first scholarship, the Samuel Williams Memorial. Scholarship would be awarded in the spring to a graduating senior planning to study engineering, but not everyone in the community was happy about the discovery or Aisha's generosity. Craig Morrison, a developer who'd been trying to buy up mountain property for a resort project, started a whisper campaign suggesting that Aisha had known about the money all along and had manipulated the auction. The rumors had no basis in fact, but they spread nonetheless. At a particularly contentious community meeting about the fund's operation, Morrison confronted Aisha directly. "It's convenient that you just happened to buy that bridge, isn't it? And now you're playing Lady Bountiful with money that should have gone to the county." Aisha stood, her 72 years of mountain living giving her a presence that silenced the room. "Mr. Morrison, I paid $1 for a collapsed bridge that everyone else was too smart to buy. I found money that had been hidden for 90 years. I gave a quarter of it to the county, taxes took another big chunk, and I'm using most of what's left to help this community. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you examine what's really bothering you." "And what's that supposed to mean?" Morrison challenged. "It means you're upset that this land and this community aren't for sale to the highest bidder," Roy Blackwood interjected, standing beside Aisha. "Some of us remember when your daddy tried to buy up these mountains in the 80s, and we sent him packing." The answer's still no. The room erupted in applause, and Morrison left, red-faced and fuming, but that confrontation marked a turning point. The community rallied around Aisha and the fund. Local businesses displayed posters about the scholarship program. Churches held informational sessions about the emergency assistance grants. Young people who'd been planning to leave the mountains started talking about staying, knowing there was now support for their dreams. 3 months after the discovery, Aisha stood at the Copper Creek Bridge site, now cleaned up, the bridge properly dismantled and removed, the creek bed restored. The county had helped with the costs, as Martin had predicted. In place of the collapsed bridge stood a beautiful overlook with interpretive signs telling the full story. The bridge's construction, the depression, the bank failure, Marcus Thorne's theft, and the discovery. The historical marker Robert Thorne had funded was prominently displayed. With text written by a historian from the State University, here stood the Copper Creek Bridge. Built 1889, collapsed 2010. In 2025, local resident Aisha Williams discovered $6.2 million hidden in its foundation, money stolen during the 1934 bank failure that devastated this community. Through Mrs. Williams's generosity and the cooperation of all parties, this discovery has been transformed from a symbol of betrayal into a source of community renewal. May we remember both the suffering of the past and the hope of the future. At the dedication ceremony, attended by half the county, Aisha spoke briefly. This bridge connected people for over a century. It collapsed, and we all thought its story was over. But maybe its real purpose was waiting all this time, to connect our past to our future, to turn tragedy into hope. That's what we're doing with this fund. That's how we honor those who came before us. Later that evening, back at her cabin, Aisha sat on her porch, newly repaired with a roof over it that didn't leak, and watched the sunset. A new truck, a sensible Ford that would handle mountain winters, sat in her driveway. Her health insurance was paid up for the year. She had enough money in the bank to cover emergencies, but more than any of that, she had purpose. The community fund was thriving. Applications for scholarships and grants were pouring in, and lives were already changing. Jake and Monica were both asleep inside, staying for the week to help with fund business. Roy's truck pulled up and her old friend joined her on the porch. "You did good, Aisha," he said simply. "We did good," she corrected. This was never just about me. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge over the Blue Ridge Mountains, the same stars that had looked down on Copper Creek for millions of years, indifferent to human drama, but somehow always bearing witness. Spring came to the mountains with its usual explosive beauty, dogwoods blooming white against the dark green forests, mountain laurel preparing to paint the hillsides pink and white. It had been 6 months since the discovery, and the Copper Creek Community Fund was beginning to show results. Aisha sat in her kitchen on a Tuesday morning, reviewing scholarship applications. The fund had received 47 applications for the 5 scholarships they would award in their first year. Reading through the essays, learning about the dreams and struggles of young people in her community, brought tears to her eyes more than once. There was Jamie Chen, Thomas's niece, who wanted to study veterinary medicine and return to practice in the mountains, where large animal vets were desperately needed. There was Marcus, ironically named, Aisha thought, Holloway, whose single mother worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat while he maintained a 4.0 average and dreamed of becoming a teacher. There was Destiny's younger brother, Aaron, who designed an app to help farmers track crop yields and wanted to study agricultural technology. Each application represented a life, a dream, a future that might not happen without help. The scholarship committee would make the final decisions, but Aisha had input, and she was determined that the money would go to students who would use their education to strengthen the community. Not just escape it. Her phone rang. Martin Cruz. "Aisha, we have a situation," he said, his tone suggesting it wasn't good news. "What kind of situation?" "The IRS is auditing the fund. It's routine for large charitable organizations, but it's going to require significant documentation and probably some legal expenses." Aisha sighed. 6 months of dealing with bureaucracy had taught her that money, even money meant for good purposes, attracted official scrutiny like honey attracted bears. "How much are we talking?" "Could be 20 to 30,000 in accounting and legal fees. The good news is I've reviewed our structure with a tax attorney, and we're solid. We'll pass the audit. It's just going to be time-consuming and expensive." "Do what needs to be done," Aisha said. "We knew this wouldn't be easy." After hanging up, she returned to the scholarship applications, but her concentration was broken. The phone rang again, this time an unknown number. "Mrs. Williams? My name is Catherine Dawson. I'm a journalist working on a book about economic inequality in rural America, and I'd like to include your story." Aisha had fielded dozens of similar requests. Most she turned down, but something in this woman's voice made her hesitate. "What kind of book?" "I'm examining how communities deal with economic shocks, both the trauma of loss and, in rare cases, the challenge of unexpected windfalls. Your story is unique because you're using your windfall to address multi-generational trauma from the Depression." "I think it's important. I'll think about it," Aisha said. "Send me some of your previous work." That afternoon, she had a visit from less welcome reporters, a team from a true crime podcast that wanted to investigate the mystery of Marcus Thorne's disappearance. They were convinced he'd been murdered for the money, and they wanted to dig up the old bridge site looking for remains. "Absolutely not," Aisha told them firmly. "That land has been restored. The creek bed is healing. You're not disturbing it for your podcast. But don't you want to know what really happened to Thorne?" The lead podcaster, a man in his 30s with expensive recording equipment, pressed. "I know what happened," Aisha said. "He stole money, hid it, and disappeared. Whether he died naturally, was killed, or lived out his days somewhere under a false name, that's all speculation. The important thing is what we do with the consequences of his actions now." They left disappointed, and Aisha made a note to mention the attempted intrusion to the sheriff. She had a feeling they'd try to access the site without permission. That evening, the scholarship committee met at the community center, a building that had been renovated partially with fund grants. Monica had helped establish clear criteria: academic achievement, community service, financial need, and demonstrated commitment to rural development. The discussions were passionate. Everyone had their favorites among the applicants, but slowly, through democratic process and thoughtful debate, 5 recipients emerged: Jamie Chen for veterinary medicine, Marcus Holloway for education, Aaron Freeman for agricultural technology, Sophia Garcia for nursing, and Daniel Whitmore for civil engineering. Each would receive $10,000 per year for 4 years, renewable based on academic performance and continued commitment to the community. I want to add one more, Aisha said, as they were finalizing the list. A non-traditional scholarship for someone older who's going back to school. The committee looked surprised. This hadn't been discussed. There are lots of people in this community who never got a chance at education when they were young, Aisha continued. They had to work, raise families, survive. Now maybe they have a chance to pursue deferred dreams. I want to honor that. After brief discussion, they agreed and added a sixth scholarship, the Second Chances Award, which went to Beth Morrison, Craig Morrison's sister, ironically. Beth was 52, had raised 4 kids alone after her husband's death, and was finally pursuing the nursing degree she'd dreamed of since high school. The scholarship ceremony was held in late May, in the high school gymnasium decorated with handmade banners. The local TV station covered it, and newspapers from across the state sent reporters. But for Aisha, the most moving moment came when Marcus Holloway accepted his award. He spoke without notes, his voice clear and strong. "My mama works as a night custodian at the hospital and mornings at the diner," he said. "She never graduated high school because she had me when she was 17. She's worked every day of my life to make sure I had opportunities she didn't. This scholarship means she doesn't have to choose between my education and keeping the lights on." Mrs. Williams, "You didn't just give me money for college. You gave my mama the chance to breathe." "Thank you." There wasn't a dry eye in the gymnasium. Afterward, at the reception, Aisha was approached by a woman in her 80s, leaning heavily on a walker. "You don't remember me," the woman said, "but I'm Elizabeth Thorne, Robert's mother, Marcus's daughter-in-law." Aisha tensed slightly, unsure what to expect. "I wanted to thank you," Elizabeth continued. "My husband lived his whole life under a cloud of shame. He was a good man, but he could never escape his father's shadow. The apology Robert issued, the truth told on that historical marker, it freed us. Yes, Marcus Thorne stole that money, but his son and grandson didn't, and now we can finally acknowledge both the wrong and try to make some amends. The fund Robert contributed to, I know it's small compared to what you've done, but it matters to us. We're part of the healing now, not just the wound." Aisha embraced her gently, mindful of the woman's frailty. "We're all part of the healing now," she said. The summer brought new projects. The fund awarded its first small business grants, $15,000, to help a young couple open a commercial kitchen for their catering business. $20,000 for a woodworker to buy equipment and create apprenticeship positions. $25,000 for a struggling bookstore to expand and create a community literacy program. Each grant recipient had to demonstrate how their business would benefit the community, create jobs, and remain locally owned. The fund wasn't about creating dependency. It was about catalyzing opportunity. But the most controversial decision came in July, when the fund bought the old schoolhouse in Miller's Gap, a building that had sat empty for 15 years since the school district consolidated. The plan was to convert it into a community center with a commercial kitchen, meeting spaces, and workspace for remote workers. "You're spending too much on one project," Craig Morrison argued at a public meeting. He'd become the fund's most vocal critic, appearing at every public forum to question decisions and suggest mismanagement. "That's $200,000 that could have gone to scholarships. It's an investment in infrastructure that will serve the community for generations," Monica countered. She'd become the fund's executive director, moving back to the mountains from Asheville. "We ran the numbers. The community center will eventually generate enough income from rentals and programs to fund its own operation and contribute back to the fund." "And who's going to run it?" Morrison demanded. "More of your friends getting cushy jobs with the fund's money." Roy Blackwood stood up slowly, his presence commanding respect. "Craig, your family has owned half the real estate in this county for 3 generations. You've made millions off these mountains. Now someone's trying to help folks who don't have millions, and you can't stand it. Why don't you say what you're really worried about?" Morrison's face reddened. "And what's that?" "That you can't control this. That there's money in this community you didn't inherit and can't buy. That regular people might have a say in their own future." The crowd applauded, and Morrison stormed out. but his criticisms had planted seeds of doubt in some minds. Aisha knew she'd have to address the concerns about accountability and transparency. The solution came from an unexpected source. Catherine Dawson, the journalist writing the book, suggested a public annual report and community review process. Make everything transparent, Catherine advised during one of their interviews. Budget, decisions, outcomes, challenges, everything. Give people ownership through information. Spring came to the mountains with its usual explosive beauty. Dogwoods blooming white against the dark green forests, mountain laurel preparing to paint the hillsides pink and white. It had been 6 months since the discovery, and the Copper Creek Community Fund was beginning to show results. Aisha sat in her kitchen on a Tuesday morning, reviewing scholarship applications. The fund had received 47 applications for the 5 scholarships they would award in their first year. Reading through the essays, learning about the dreams and struggles of young people in her community, brought tears to her eyes more than once. There was Jamie Chen, Thomas's niece, who wanted to study veterinary medicine and return to practice in the mountains where large animal vets were desperately needed. There was Marcus, ironically named, Aisha thought, Holloway, whose single mother worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat while he maintained a 4.0 average and dreamed of becoming a teacher. There was Destiny's younger brother, Aaron, who designed an app to help farmers track crop yields and wanted to study agricultural technology. Each application represented a life, a dream, a future that might not happen without help. The scholarship committee would make the final decisions, but Aisha had input, and she was determined that the money would go to students who would use their education to strengthen the community. Not just escape it. Her phone rang. Martin Cruz. "Aisha, we have a situation," he said, his tone suggesting it wasn't good news. "What kind of situation?" "The IRS is auditing the fund. It's routine for large charitable organizations, but it's going to require significant documentation and probably some legal expenses." Aisha sighed. 6 months of dealing with bureaucracy had taught her that money, even money meant for good purposes, attracted official scrutiny like honey attracted bears. "How much are we talking?" "Could be 20 to 30,000 in accounting and legal fees. The good news is I've reviewed our structure with a tax attorney and we're solid. We'll pass the audit. It's just going to be time-consuming and expensive." "Do what needs to be done," Aisha said. "We knew this wouldn't be easy." After hanging up, she returned to the scholarship applications, but her concentration was broken. The phone rang again, this time an unknown number. "Mrs. Williams. My name is Catherine Dawson. I'm a journalist working on a book about economic inequality in rural America, and I'd like to include your story." Aisha had fielded dozens of similar requests. Most she turned down, but something in this woman's voice made her hesitate. "What kind of book?" "I'm examining how communities deal with economic shocks, both the trauma of loss and, in rare cases, the challenge of unexpected windfalls. Your story is unique because you're using your windfall to address multi-generational trauma from the Depression. I think it's important. I'll think about it," Aisha said. "Send me some of your previous work." That afternoon, she had a visit from less welcome reporters, a team from a true crime podcast that wanted to investigate the mystery of Marcus Thorne's disappearance. They were convinced he'd been murdered for the money, and they wanted to dig up the old bridge site looking for remains. "Absolutely not," Aisha told them firmly. "That land has been restored. The creek bed is healing. You're not disturbing it for your podcast, but don't you want to know what really happened to Thorne?" The lead podcaster, a man in his 30s with expensive recording equipment, pressed. "I know what happened," Aisha said. "He stole money, hid it, and disappeared. Whether he died naturally, was killed, or lived out his days somewhere under a false name, that's all speculation. The important thing is what we do with the consequences of his actions now." They left disappointed, and Aisha made a note to mention the attempted intrusion to the sheriff. She had a feeling they'd try to access the site without permission. That evening, the scholarship committee met at the community center, a building that had been renovated partially with fund grants. Monica had helped establish clear criteria: academic achievement, community service, financial need, and demonstrated commitment to rural development. The discussions were passionate. Everyone had their favorites among the applicants. But slowly, through democratic process and thoughtful debate, 5 recipients emerged. Jamie Chen for veterinary medicine, Marcus Holloway for education, Aaron Freeman for agricultural technology, Sophia Garcia for nursing, and Daniel Whitmore for civil engineering. Each would receive $10,000 per year for 4 years, renewable based on academic performance and continued commitment to the community. "I want to add one more," Aisha said as they were finalizing the list. "A non-traditional scholarship for someone older who's going back to school." The committee looked surprised. This hadn't been discussed. There are lots of people in this community who never got a chance at education when they were young, Aisha continued. They had to work, raise families, survive. Now maybe they have a chance to pursue deferred dreams. I want to honor that. After brief discussion, they agreed and added a 6th scholarship, the Second Chances Award, which went to Beth Morrison, Craig Morrison's sister, ironically. Beth was 52, had raised 4 kids alone after her husband's death, and was finally pursuing the nursing degree she dreamed of since high school. The scholarship ceremony was held in late May in the high school gymnasium, decorated with handmade banners. The local TV station covered it, and newspapers from across the state sent reporters. But for Aisha, the most moving moment came when Marcus Holloway accepted his award. He spoke without notes, his voice clear and strong. "My mama works as a night custodian at the hospital and mornings at the diner," he said. "She never graduated high school because she had me when she was 17. She's worked every day of my life to make sure I had opportunities she didn't. This scholarship means she doesn't have to choose between my education and keeping the lights on. Mrs. Williams, you didn't just give me money for college. You gave my mama the chance to breathe. Thank you." There wasn't a dry eye in the gymnasium. Afterward, at the reception, Aisha was approached by a woman in her 80s, leaning heavily on a walker. "You don't remember me," the woman said, "but I'm Elizabeth Thorne, Robert's mother, Marcus's daughter-in-law." Aisha tensed slightly, unsure what to expect. "I wanted to thank you," Elizabeth continued. "My husband lived his whole life under a cloud of shame. He was a good man, but he could never escape his father's shadow." The apology Robert issued, the truth told on that historical marker, it freed us. Yes, Marcus Thorne stole that money, but his son and grandson didn't, and now we can finally acknowledge both the wrong and try to make some amends. The fund Robert contributed to, I know it's small compared to what you've done, but it matters to us. We're part of the healing now, not just the wound. Aisha embraced her gently, mindful of the woman's frailty. "We're all part of the healing now," she said. The summer brought new projects. The fund awarded its first small business grants, $15,000 to help a young couple open a commercial kitchen for their catering business, $20,000 for a woodworker to buy equipment and create apprenticeship positions, $25,000 for a struggling bookstore to expand and create a community literacy program. Each grant recipient had to demonstrate how their business would benefit the community, to create jobs and remain locally owned. The fund wasn't about creating dependency, it was about catalyzing opportunity. But the most controversial decision came in July when the fund bought the old schoolhouse in Miller's Gap, a building that had sat empty for 15 years since the school district consolidated. The plan was to convert it into a community center with a commercial kitchen, meeting spaces, and workspace for remote workers. "You're spending too much on one project," Craig Morrison argued at a public meeting. He'd become the fund's most vocal critic, appearing at every public forum to question decisions and suggest mismanagement. "That's $200,000 that could have gone to scholarships. It's an investment in infrastructure that will serve the community for generations," Monica countered. She'd become the fund's executive director, moving back to the mountains from Asheville. "We ran the numbers. The community center will eventually generate enough income from rentals and programs to fund its own operation and contribute back to the fund. And who's going to run it? Morrison demanded. More of your friends getting cushy jobs with the fund's money? Roy Blackwood stood up slowly, his presence commanding respect. Craig, your family has owned half the real estate in this county for 3 generations. You've made millions off these mountains. Now someone's trying to help folks who don't have millions, and you can't stand it. Why don't you say what you're really worried about? Morrison's face reddened. And what's that? That you can't control this. That there's money in this community you didn't inherit and can't buy. That regular people might have a say in their own future. The crowd applauded, and Morrison stormed out, but his criticisms had planted seeds of doubt in some minds. Aisha knew she'd have to address the concerns about accountability and transparency. The solution came from an unexpected source. Catherine Dawson, the fund's first annual journalist writing the book, suggested a public annual report and community review process. Make everything transparent, Catherine advised during one of their interviews. Budget, decisions, outcomes, challenges, everything. Give people ownership through information. The fund's first annual report was released in September, a detailed accounting of every dollar received and spent, every decision made, every outcome achieved. It was posted online, printed in the local paper, and available as a pamphlet at the library and community centers. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Even some of Morrison's supporters had to admit that the fund was well managed and achieving its stated goals. But the real measure of success came in small, personal stories that Aisha collected in her journal. Jamie Chen's mother crying tears of joy when her daughter was accepted to veterinary school. The woodworker hiring his first apprentice. A young man who'd been working minimum wage at a chain store, Beth Morrison. The Second Chances Scholarship recipient, making straight A's and talking about becoming a nurse. Practitioner to serve rural communities. 3. Families avoiding eviction through emergency assistance grants. The Commercial Kitchen, incubating 2 new businesses, 6 months of operation. 6 lives dramatically changed, dozens more subtly improved. A community beginning to believe in its own future again, as Aisha sat on her porch one September evening, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. She thought about bridges, not just the iron structure that had collapsed into Copper Creek, but the connections between past and future, trauma and healing, individual fortune and community benefit. She'd bought a bridge for $1 and found $3 million. But the real treasure, she was learning, wasn't the money. It was watching her community discover its own worth, watching young people choose to stay instead of leave. Watching hope take root in soil that had known too much struggle. Samuel would have loved this, she thought. He'd always believed in these mountains and their people. The phone rang, Jake calling from Charlotte. Mom, I have news. I've been offered a position with a firm that does rural infrastructure development. I'd be based in Asheville, working throughout the region. I could be home every weekend. Jake, that's wonderful. But what about your job in Charlotte? I've realized something these past 6 months, watching what you're building. Charlotte's fine, but it's not home. These mountains are home. You and Dad raised me to understand that, and it took finding millions of dollars hidden in a bridge to remind me. After they hung up, Aisha sat in the darkness, smiling. The ripple effect of that $1 purchase on a whim continued to spread in ways she couldn't have imagined. Tomorrow, she'd review grant applications for the fall cycle. Next week, the community center construction would begin. Next month, the second scholarship cycle would open for applications. But tonight, she'd just sit here and be grateful for collapsed bridges, hidden treasures, and the chance to build something meaningful in the autumn of her life. Winter came early to the Blue Ridge Mountains that year. By late October, Aisha was already laying in firewood and preparing her cabin for the cold months ahead. She'd installed a new propane heating system with her personal funds, one of the few indulgences she'd allowed herself. But old habits died hard, and she still kept the wood stove burning most days. The Copper Creek Community Fund was thriving as it approached its first anniversary. They'd awarded 12 scholarships, funded 8 small businesses, assisted 19 families through emergency grants, and broken ground on the Miller's Gap Community Center. The fund's endowment, carefully managed by a professional firm vetted by Martin Cruz, had even grown slightly thanks to conservative investments. But success, Aisha was learning, attracted both admiration and resentment. The challenge came on a grey November morning. Delivered by certified mail, a lawsuit filed by a group calling itself Citizens for Fiscal Accountability, with Craig Morrison listed as the lead plaintiff. The suit alleged mismanagement of funds, nepotism. Monica's role as executive director was specifically cited, lack of proper oversight, and violation of the fund's charitable mission. It demanded an independent audit, removal of the current board, and reassessment of all grants and scholarships already awarded. Aisha read the complaint twice, her hands trembling with a combination of anger and hurt. After everything she'd tried to do, after all the transparency and care they'd exercised, this felt like a betrayal. Martin Cruz arrived within an hour of her call, his usual calm demeanor replaced by visible anger. "This is harassment, pure and simple," he said, reading through the complaint. "Morrison's been trying to undermine the fund since day one. Now he's using the legal system to do it. Can he win?" Aisha asked. "Win? No, every allegation here is baseless. We have documentation for everything. The fund has already undergone IRS scrutiny and passed, and Monica was hired through a proper search process. She wasn't just appointed because she's your daughter. But fighting this will cost money and time, which is exactly what Morrison wants. Why is he doing this?" Martin sighed. "I did some digging. Morrison had plans to buy the old Miller's Gap schoolhouse and several other properties in that area for a development project. The fund's purchase of the schoolhouse blocked his plans. This is revenge, and it's also strategy. If he can tie up the fund in litigation, it can't make new purchases that might interfere with his real estate interests." "That's despicable," Aisha said quietly. "It's also how some people operate," Martin replied. "The question is, how do we respond?" They decided on a two-pronged approach: aggressive legal defense and public transparency. Martin would file a motion to dismiss based on the frivolous nature of the claims, while Aisha would hold a public meeting to address the community directly. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at the high school gymnasium. Aisha spent the intervening days preparing, gathering documentation, and rehearsing what she wanted to say. Monica helped put together a presentation with charts, graphs, and detailed accounting. The night of the meeting, the gymnasium was packed. News of the lawsuit had spread through the community like wildfire, and people had strong opinions. Aisha spotted both supporters and critics in the crowd, including Morrison himself, sitting in the front row with several well-dressed individuals she didn't recognize. Aisha stood at the podium, her 72 years of mountain living evident in every line of her face and the steady strength in her voice. "I'm not going to waste your time with a long speech," she began. "You all know what happened last year. You know I bought a bridge for $1 and found money hidden inside. You know I could have fought to keep most of it for myself, but I chose to share it with this community. Not because I'm a saint, I'm not, but because I'm a part of this place, and I believe we take care of our own." She clicked to the first slide, showing the fund's complete financial records. "Mr. Morrison and his group claim we've mismanaged money. Here are the facts. Every single dollar received and spent, publicly documented. We've been audited by the IRS and passed. We've had our books reviewed by independent accountants. We operate with more transparency than most charities our size." Click next slide. "They claim nepotism because my daughter is the executive director. Here's the truth. Monica has a master's degree in social work and 10 years of experience managing community programs. When we posted the position, we received 14 applications. A committee that didn't include me or Monica reviewed all of them. Monica was selected because she was the most qualified. She works for a modest salary, less than she made in Asheville, and she's put in 60-hour weeks building this fund into what it is. Click. They claim we're violating our charitable mission. Here are the results of our first year: 12 students in college who wouldn't be there otherwise. 8 new businesses creating 17 new jobs. 19 families who didn't lose their homes or go hungry. A community center that will serve this area for generations. If that's not charitable, I don't know what is. She paused, looking directly at Morrison. I know why this lawsuit was filed. It's not about accountability or proper management. It's about control. Some people are uncomfortable with the idea that regular folks in this community now have resources and options they didn't have before. Some people preferred things the way they were. When the only money in these mountains belonged to the same few families it's always belonged to. The gymnasium was silent, every eye on her. So here's what I'm going to do, Aisha continued. I'm going to fight this lawsuit, and I'm going to win because the truth is on our side. But I'm also going to propose something to this community. Let's expand the fund's board and create a community advisory council. More voices, more perspectives, more accountability. I never wanted this to be my fund. I wanted it to be our fund. So let's make it truly ours. The applause started slowly, then built into a standing ovation. Not everyone stood. Morrison and his group remained seated, stony-faced, but the majority of the room was on their feet. After the presentation, during the question and answer period, things got heated. Morrison took the microphone and delivered a prepared statement about unqualified people making decisions about millions of dollars and the need for professional management. Roy Blackwood responded, Craig, your family has been professionally managing their fortune in this county for 70 years. And what has it gotten the rest of us? High rents, low wages, and young people leaving because they can't afford to stay. Maybe we don't need that kind of professional. As the sun climbed higher, cars began arriving for the celebration. The county commissioners were coming, along with state representatives, dozens of scholarship recipients and grant beneficiaries, and hundreds of community members. Catherine Dawson was there too, working on a follow-up book about the fund's second year. Her first book had won several awards and had sparked a national conversation about rural wealth inequality and community-based philanthropy. You've started something bigger than just this one fund, Catherine had told Aisha during their most recent interview. Communities across the country are looking at this model. Local money invested locally, with community control and transparency. You're proving it can work. The celebration began at 10 a.m. with remarks from various speakers. The county commission chair thanked Aisha for her generosity and vision. The state representative announced that the legislature was considering a tax incentive program to encourage charitable endowments in rural areas, inspired directly by the Copper Creek model. Then Aisha was called to the podium. She'd prepared remarks, but found herself setting aside her notes and speaking from the heart. 2 years ago, I bought a bridge for $1 because I couldn't stand to see it forgotten. It was an impulsive decision, probably not very smart, definitely not practical. My late husband Samuel would have shaken his head and laughed at me. What I found beneath that bridge changed my life, but not in the ways you might think. Yes, the money was life-changing, but the real transformation came from what the money allowed us to build together, emphasis on together. This was never about one woman's generosity. It was about a community deciding what it wanted to become. Every scholarship, every grant, every decision about how to use this money has been made collectively, with input from dozens of voices, many of them disagreeing with each other. She paused, making eye contact with Morrison, who sat in the crowd with his wife. We've argued, we've disagreed, we've even sued each other. But we've also listened, compromised, and found common ground. That's not always comfortable, but it's how communities work, how they survive and thrive. The money we found was stolen 90 years ago from people who were suffering. We can't give it back to them, but we've tried to honor their memory by using it to prevent the kind of suffering they endured. We've tried to build a future where young people don't have to choose between education and eating, where businesses can start without crushing debt, where emergency medical bills don't mean losing your home. Have we succeeded? Ask Jamie Chen, who's studying veterinary medicine. Ask Marcus Holloway, who's going to teach in the same classrooms where he once struggled. Ask the young mother whose baby I met last week at the community center, attending a free parenting class while her toddler played in the free childcare program. That bridge connected people for over a century. When it collapsed, we thought that was the end of its story. But maybe it had one more connection to make between our past and our future, between individual fortune and collective good, between what was and what could be. She stepped back from the podium to sustained applause. But the ceremony wasn't over. Monica approached the podium with a large, covered object. On behalf of the Copper Creek Community Funds Board and Advisory Council, we'd like to unveil a permanent addition to this site. She removed the covering to reveal a bronze sculpture, a bridge spanning a gap, with human figures crossing it together. On the base was a plaque, the Aisha Williams Memorial Bridge, not a structure but a connection, not an ending but a beginning, built not with iron but with hope. Dedicated October 11th, 2027, Memorial, Aisha said, alarmed. I'm not dead yet. The crowd laughed, but Monica smiled gently. It's not that kind of memorial, Mom. It's a memorial to an action, to a choice, to what one person's courage and generosity can inspire in a community. This bridge will stand here long after we're all gone, reminding future generations that bridges can be built in many ways. Aisha found herself crying, something she rarely did in public. Jake came forward and embraced her, followed by Monica. Then a wave of community members wanting to express their gratitude. As the formal ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed to enjoy a picnic lunch, Aisha found a quiet spot at the overlook's edge and looked down at Copper Creek. Flowing as it had for millennia, Roy joined her, as he often did during significant moments. You know what I think, Aisha? What's that? I think Samuel's up there somewhere laughing his head off. You bought a bridge for $1, he's thinking. Of course you did. That's exactly the kind of thing you do. Aisha smiled through her tears. He did always say I had more heart than sense. Maybe that's not a bad thing, Roy said. Sense is useful, but heart changes the world. They stood in companionable silence, watching the creek and the mountains beyond. Later that afternoon, after most of the crowd had dispersed, Aisha walked down to the creek bed where the bridge had once stood. The restoration work had been excellent. You could barely tell there'd been a massive iron structure here. Wildflowers grew along the banks, and she spotted a blue heron fishing in the shallows. She thought about the crates she and Jake had opened that morning 2 years ago, the bundles of old currency, the gold coins, the bearer bonds. She thought about Marcus Thorne, the desperate banker who'd stolen from desperate people. She thought about all the lives that money had touched, destroyed, and now finally helped. I hope this makes it right, she said quietly to the wind, to the mountains, to whatever ghosts might be listening. I hope this is what redemption looks like. Her phone buzzed, a reminder that the fund's quarterly board meeting was tomorrow, where they'd review applications for the winter grant cycle and discuss expanding the scholarship program to include trade school and apprenticeship support. At 74, Aisha Williams had no intention of slowing down. There was too much work to do, too many people who needed help, too many bridges yet to build. She climbed back up to the overlook, where Jake and his daughters were examining the bronze sculpture. Her granddaughters were asking questions about the bridge, about the money, about what it all meant. It means, Aisha told them, that sometimes the most valuable things are the ones you find when you're not looking for them. And that $1 can change the world if it's invested with love. As they drove home together, past the community center, past the businesses the fund had helped start, past homes where scholarship recipients lived and worked, Aisha felt a profound sense of peace. She'd bought a collapsed bridge for $1, found $3 million hidden beneath it, given most of it away, and in return, She'd received something far more valuable, the knowledge that her life had mattered, that her choices had made a difference, that the community she loved would be stronger for future generations. The bridge was gone, but its final purpose had been fulfilled, not carrying cars across a creek, but carrying hope across time, connecting the suffering of the past to the possibilities of the future. And that, Aisha thought as the mountains turned purple in the evening light, was worth far more than $3 million. It was worth everything. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.